When we talk about rounding, we're talking about making a number simpler to read, use and calculate. For example, if I wanted to round the number 12.6389 to the nearest whole number, what I'm actually saying is that number nearer to the number 12 or the number 13? If I considered putting that number on a number line, as I have here, the number would appear somewhere past the halfway point. So we can see by that this number is in fact nearer to 13. So rounding 12.6389 to the nearest whole number would mean rounding it to 13. We tend, however, not to be drawing number lines and placing numbers on when it comes to rounding any digit. What we have learned to do is to identify the degree of accuracy to which we're rounding a number and round it from there. So if we're looking at 27.821 to the nearest whole number, we want to finish our number right at this point. That's the nearest whole number. What we then do is we look at the number that comes straight after that point of rounding, and we want to identify whether the number is between 0 and 4 or 5 and above. If that number is between 0 and 4, we would keep this nearest whole number the same as it appears. But in this example, you can see 8 falls into the other category. It's 5 or above. What happens in this instance is we are going to add 1 to the number before the break. So that means this number will become 28. Rounding 27.821 to the nearest whole number will become 28. What we must practice, therefore, is being able to identify where our number rounding comes. So here we have 3 examples of what we could be asked for. To round a number to the nearest 10, to round a number to the nearest 100, or to round a number to the nearest 1,000. In the first example, we have to identify the number that is in the tens column. That's this 3 here. So we are rounding our number to this point. We look to the 1 to see if it has an effect on the 3. Being below 5, it has no effect. So our first 3 numbers will remain the same. This column here, however, is returned to a 0. Rounding to the nearest 10, 4,830. The second number we're going to round to the nearest 100. So we identify the hundreds column. Here's the point at which we are going to round our number. Again, looking to the next column to see if it has an effect, and this time, being 5 or above, it does. We add 1 to this column here. The numbers after our point of rounding return to 0. 9,273 rounded to 9,300. And our final example, rounding to thousands, the nearest 1,000. Here's the number in our thousands column. So this is the point of rounding. Does the 1 have an effect on the 6? No, it doesn't. 36,000. Now here are 2 terms that we very often get confused. The first one says we are to round that number to the nearest decimal place. Therefore, we are looking for the number that appears one digit after the decimal point. That's this 8 here. So rounding 437.86 to one decimal place means we are rounding to this point here. Does the 6 have an effect on the 8? Yes, it does. We add 1 to that column, so our rounded number becomes 437.9. By contrast, rounding to one significant figure is a completely different way of looking at the number. Significant figures refer to the most important numbers that we see in the number that we are given. Rounding to one significant figure means we just want one digit that isn't a 0. So reading the number from left to right, our one significant figure is the 2. We're rounding to this point here. Once we've identified the point of rounding, our rounding mechanics is exactly the same as we would do normally. (27.32) to one significant figure is rounded to 30. I've put the 2 zeros to show that we turn every other digit in that number to 0. However, when it comes to any zeros appearing after the decimal point, we don't need to use them. So we could write this number as 30.00, but more accurately, we would write the number as 30. The reason we get confused with the notation of significant figures is because the point of rounding changes with whatever number we have. Here I'm going to show you how to round to 2 significant figures, and then by comparison how to round to 3 significant figures. With the first example, rounding to 2 significant figures, the number 42,791. I count from the left 1, 2 figures. That means this is the point at which I'm rounding my number. Does the 7 have an effect on the 2? Yes, it does. Add 1 to that column. 43, returning the last 3 digits to zeros. My number rounds to 43,000. In my second example, I want to round again to 2 significant figures, not to be confused with 2 decimal places. I start counting at the beginning of my number, 1, 2 figures in. There is the point at which I'm rounding my number. My 9 increases the number in this column by 1, so my rounded number becomes 6.2. 6.192 rounds to 6.2. Now my 3 significant figure examples mean the point of rounding is one further number in from the front. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to round my number here. The 8 means I'm now adding to this third column. My number rounds to 8, 6, 3, and the rest returns to 0. 86,300. 300. Now my third example with a decimal, I count 1, 2, 3. There is the point I'm rounding. 7 means I add 1 to this column here, and my number becomes 8.39.